And pivot tables happen to be a very important feature of Excel, which have great potential to be worked with, and you can do a lot of things with pivot tables. Very simple. We have a large set of data. This has got approximately 18 to 19 columns of data. That's a huge data set. Okay, and it has been spread over approximately more than a lakh rows, so 113,000 rows of data. So close to over 130,000 rows of data and 19 columns, which happens to be a huge set of data. So if you enter the 6th and intermediate module, you will realize this is the same data that we used for the sorting and filtering example. The only difference is that was a subset of this entire set of data. That is only for one particular country, Australia. This is for the entire regions where the company operates. Now, with respect to Excel, if you want to consolidate this data or you want to summarize this data, doing it in this form is slightly difficult, even though you may be able to use the sum if and the average if. Because sum if and average if are great in cases you are using data to, just quickly have an understanding. But if you want to keep doing a lot of operations on your data and you want to see all the analysis in the data, you will need pivot tables, because pivot tables are a tool, or pivot table is a tool which allows you to do a lot of ad hoc analysis. Ad hoc meaning whatever you want to do according to your requirement. You don't have to stick to a particular way of working. You can analyze whichever field you want to analyze. You can analyze whichever concept you want to analyze with respect to the data. Whereas in sum if and all these average if and sum if and if, you can use it. But the problem is with these kinds of formulas, the major drawback is that it will be a static kind of a formula. Even though yes, you can make dynamic with drop downs and all that, but instead of doing all that hard work, you can use a simple pivot table, and the pivot table will help you manage most of your problems with respect to data analysis. Now, with respect to data analysis, let us understand that when you are doing data analysis, you have to answer a few questions for your data. Now, what do you mean by answer a few questions? You have a huge set of data, and in that data, so let's just have a look at the fields here. Here the date, here the month, the year, the customer ID, age group, customer gender, then the country, state, category, subcategory, product, frame size, order quantity, unit cost, unit price, cost and revenue. So these are very important fields that we have in our data that need to be analyzed. And based on these fields, we need to perform our quick analysis of the data. So here, we need to first understand what kind of data are we working with. So when you work with data, remember that data is broadly divided into two types of data. One data is data which is called categorical data. So if any of you are familiar with statistics, probably you will have a better understanding of this. Categorical data, and you have got continuous data, or some people also call this as ratio data. Whereas categorical also referred to as discrete data. Now what do you mean by this? Categorical and discrete. What do you mean by categorical and continuous or discrete ratio variables? Now first thing we need to understand with respect to categorical, I'll keep it very simple, complicated. With respect to categorical data is the data that cannot be used for calculations. So you cannot perform calculations on it. Only frequency or count is possible. Okay. Now under categorical, you can have two types of data. You can have nominal data and ordinal data. I won't get into the details of this. Okay. This is very in-depth details, but nominal and ordinal. Nominal is basically just simply an attribute of a entity. It could be maybe color, it could be size, etc. Not size basically. It could be a color, or it could be maybe what is it? You can have color, you can have model of car, you can have maybe the product category. These are all nominal fields. Why? Because there is no order possible in nominal fields. That you cannot say red is greater than green or green is greater than red. Similarly, you cannot say that a product category accessories is greater than product category bikes, or bikes is greater than accessories. Okay, that's not possible. Next kind of field is ordinal field. Ordinal field is basically a field which is discrete but has got some order in it. Like, for example, you can say the year. Year is categorical. It has got order. Like 2012 before 2013. Similarly, next kind of field could be your educational qualification. So you know that according to educational qualification, post-graduation comes after graduation. Next is another example that you can have in terms of our data is the age group. So for age group, you have got 4 age groups. The first age group is the youth, that is starting from up to 25. Okay. Then you have got the young adults. Then you have got the adults, and then you have got the seniors. So basically, you have to decide. You have to first understand or identify which type of fields you are working with in your data, and then accordingly we will create our pivot tables. Okay, so remember, no calculations are possible, and only frequency or count is possible. Then you have got the nominal data. Okay, you have got the nominal data or the ordinal data. Now remember, nominal data is basically data which does not have any order and cannot have any calculations performed on it, whereas ordinal data is data which has got some order to it, and you can perform only frequency and count on that particular field of data. The next important aspect of categorical or discrete fields is it will form. So it forms rows and columns in pivot tables. So I'm just writing PP in pivot tables, and axis and legends graphs. So these fields will form the axes and legends in the graphs or rows and columns in the pivot table. Also, very importantly, they are used to slice and dice the data. So I'll explain what these are. So slicing and dicing comes from a field which is called as data analytics. I'm sure everybody's heard of this field or this particular important aspect. Decision making based on the data that is provided to you. So in some way or the other, we are also doing some very basic level, elementary level of data analytics of our data. We are trying to understand what happened, which country had the maximum sales, which category had the maximum sales, and then based on that maybe we can decide as to, okay, if these countries did not have good sales, then what should be done to enhance the sales in those areas, etc. etc. Now let's look at the continuous or the ratios fields. So here you have got, in these fields, calculations are absolutely possible. So calculations are possible. Okay, you can have some average, max, min, whatever you require. Whatever calculation you wish to summarize or aggregate your data at, you can do that. So you can say total sales or average sales or whatever, average profit, total profit. It's very simple. Ratio has got an absolute zero. Now what do you mean by absolute zero? Absolute zero refers to the state where the absence, or absolute zero means it is the absence of a particular quantity you are trying to measure. For example, if I say 0 centimeter, that means there is no length, which means there is an absence of length in this scenario. If I say 0 kg, it means absence of weight. So you can have 0 in this kind of a situation where it is nothing but a absolute zero, where you can say absolute, that means there is no height, there is no length or there is no height, and there is no weight or there is no mass, basically. That's what it means. So here you have an absolute zero, in interval scale you don't have an absolute zero. And importantly, in this it forms the values area, or this is used in the values area in both graphs, pivot table as well. Okay, and this is the value, or these are the values that will be sliced and diced, which means that in a simple in a simple language, if I have got a total sales of $9.5 million, okay, when I have this in the values area, that means if I put the revenue in the values area, okay, and if I put the country into the rows area, so what that will do, it will slice this 9.5 million into how many other countries I have, and it will show me the sales according to those countries. Similarly, I can use the year inside the columns area. So what that will do, it will further on, but this time this is slicing of the data, and this is dicing of the data. Here it will dice the data, and here it will slice the data. Clear? There's a lot of theory that we talked about. Now let's look at the practical perspective, or let us look at how we can actually do it in Excel pivot table. So click on this data tab here, which has got the entire data. Now you have to insert a pivot table. So I'll show you. With respect to a pivot table, if your data is not formatted as a table, that means you don't see this table design on top. When you click within the boundary of your data, it will be a format which is a range format. In that case, you need to click the insert tab and click on pivot table. So when you click pivot table, you see the dancing ants border around your data. Now by default, this is the table format, hence it has picked up the entire table. If it does not pick up, then you have to manually go and select the first cell, then use Control Shift down and Control Shift click. That will pick up the entire data that you have, and see, it will give you the same thing, sales table, which means you have selected the entire sales table. That's the table, okay? And you can either click OK or click cancel. So I'll just click cancel and show you the other way around. You can click table design instead of clicking insert and click pivot table. Click on table design, and you have the option to summarize with a pivot table. So click summarize with pivot table, and then just click leave this as it is, sales table, and then click new worksheet. Once you click new worksheet, just click OK. So when you click OK over here, what it does is it adds a new pivot table to your data. And this is a blank pivot table for you, okay? And this blank pivot table that you see will be having the analyze and the design tab. Okay, so you have these two tabs. Now what are these two tabs called? Anyone? These are called as contextual tabs. These are called contextual tabs. So these contextual tabs are basically going to have all the commands associated with the current object you are working with. Okay, so if I insert maybe a graph or something, you will see a contextual tab which will be for charts. But now I am working with pivot table, hence you can see a pivot table analyze tab and a design tab. So let me quickly take you through. The first is you have the pivot table analyze tab. Here you will be working with all the operations with respect to your pivot table. You can assign a name to your pivot table, you can insert slicers, etc. And then you can even change the data source where your data is being picked up from. Also, if you have to clear any filters that you have applied, or maybe you have to select any pivot table, so selecting the entire pivot table, or you want to move the pivot table from one sheet to another sheet. Okay, if you want to create a pivot chart after you have created a pivot table. Now the advantage of a pivot chart, unlike other charts, is you can even filter directly from your chart, and when the data changes anywhere and when you refresh your pivot table, automatically your charts will also be refreshed. or updated. That is the advantage of using a pivot chart instead of using a regular chart. And to the right, okay, you have a pivot table field list. Now this field list is available because you are clicking inside the pivot table boundary. If you click outside the boundary of the pivot table, you will not be able to see the pivot table list. So you can click this pivot table or the boundary of the pivot table, and you will be able to see the pivot table list for your reference. Now, when you click pivot table analyze tab, you have got whatever can be seen in the pivot table. So you have got field list, plus minus buttons, and field headers. So what does this field list toggle on and off do? When you click field list, it does not show you the field list. You have toggled it off. So to put it on, just click on pivot on the pivot table and see. When you can see pivot table analyze, click pivot table analyze and click field list. So now you can see the field list over here. The next step is going to be to create your basic pivot table, and then from there onwards we will proceed with some advanced concepts of pivot tables. So what do you do in a pivot table? The first thing what you do is you first understand what do you want to find out. So what I will do is I will try to jot down a few questions regarding the business, okay, that a typical business owner would ask his or her employees. So very simply, we will just drag the revenue into the values area. When I click revenue, it will automatically be transferred to the values area. Now we have got a revenue of somewhere close to $9.5 million. And this $9.5 million is the total revenue. Okay, I can write total revenue for all years. So this is the total revenue across the entire period the data has been shared for. Okay, now the next question will be, I want to find out total revenue by country. So let's say I want to find out total revenue by the country or country-wise, basically. So what can I do is, I can do one simple thing. I have this value, okay? But before I do that simple thing, or before I move ahead, I will just do a small change. I will select the cell or select this field that we have, that is the sum of revenue, and click on the value field settings. After you click value field settings, you will select the number format. Okay, click on number format. By default, the aggregation is taking place at sum. If you wish to change it, you can do it in that particular dialog box as well. Now, you can select the format that you want to use. So let's use the accounting format. Instead of using a rupee symbol, we'll use the English USD symbol. The reason is because that's where the data has come from. Okay, it's an international currency, and we'll remove these decimal places. Now you can click OK. Click OK once again. So what that does is it gives you comma separated values, or sorry, not comma separated values, basically comma formatted values for the sum of revenue. Now things have become relatively a little more clear than it was before. Okay, now it's clearly seen that it's 9 lakh, this is 95 lakhs 17,000. So what we'll do is it's close to somewhere $9.5 million. So now you can just see how we are going to look at this data or filter this data or split this 9.5 lakhs into various countries. So what I can do is I can just drag the country into the rows area. But instead of doing that, I explained a very important concept, right? So here in this, you will notice that whenever you are working with any data which is categorical, which is clearly non-numerical, okay, in Excel, now it does not, see there's no difference between, so the continuous variable and categorical variable do not depend on the numerical and non-numerical. It is basically a situation where even if you have a numerical field as a categorical field, if you aggregate it, it's of no use. Like if you say the total of years, like 2014 plus 2015 plus 2016, it will give you some random value, maybe some 6,000 some value. But that does not actually give you a meaning. It's of no use. So that is a problem. So what Excel does is when you click your file, when you click any field inside the fields which has numbers in it, what it does is it takes it directly to the values area, because that is how it is supposed to behave with numbers that have values in it. Okay, so I'll just click year, and automatically it will take the year to the sum of revenue or the just below sum of revenue or the value area. Now if I get the sum of year, which is some random large number, it does not really make sense for me because this is not what I want. So what I want to find out is how much money was made per year. So I can just drag the sum of year outside and put it into the rows area. Very simple. Or else, if I don't have it here, I can drag the year from the field list and drag it into the rows area. So now very clearly you can see that 2015 was the year which had the maximum sales. Can you see that, everyone?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. So now what we are going to do is, we are going to start working full-fledged with our pivot tables, and we'll see how to quickly analyze the data. Now let's move the year from the rows area Otherwise, let the year be in the rows area. And what we want to find out is, we also want to find out, according to the year, we have got the customer gender. So we want to find out which gender did better in terms of sales. Was it from females or was it from the males? So I can drag the customer gender into the accounts area, columns area. But instead of that, what I will do is I will just select the customer gender. So what happens is when you select a cell, when you select a pivot field from the pivot table field list, what it does is according to whatever data this column has, it will automatically place it to the respective row area. So if I use the customer gender, if I click it, it will create a nested row for me. So instead of that, what I can do is I can just drag the customer gender and put it into the columns area. So I can drag the customer gender from here and put it into the columns area. That gives me a clear picture of the two genders and across the number of years that we have been working in this particular this data. So whatever data you have, you can put it here and then you can start working with it. So remember that the default way of working with non-numerical fields in cell pivot table is it will go to the rows area, and default way of working with the numerical fields is it will go to the values area. Ideally, that is how it is supposed to be done. But Excel does not understand the difference between categorical and continuous fields. What they just understand is, in this case, that anything that is coming in to the data, they will not work on the additional logic. It will be categorized into numerical and non-numerical data. So in such cases, you have to manually create your pivot table. You can't just keep clicking and then allowing it to go into whichever area it wants to go. So instead of that, you just drag your field and you put it into whichever area of the pivot table you want. So now I have got the slicing as well as the dicing done. So that 9.5 million is now segregated first into the gender, and then from gender it is according to the year, or else it is split according to year and then according to the gender. Whatever you want to take it, it can be taken accordingly. Now the question is, what do we do with so large numbers? These numbers are really a difficult task to be analyzing. So instead of that, what we can do is, we can view these numbers as percentages, and those percentages are going to be very simple to analyze because these are large numbers and these numbers become difficult for you to analyze. Obviously, when you look at these numbers, you are unable to understand what is the percentage or what is the actual value for each of them. You have to manually look and compare them. So instead of this, what you can do is you can have percentages. Now, how do you convert these into percentages? I know a lot of people, what they do, they drag or they copy this data and they paste it inside some other cell and then they divide each of the value by the grand total. But you don't have to do anything of that sort. You can display any one of the values. Right click it, select the option show values as, and then click the percentage of grand total. So I'll show you each of these one by one. Not all, but just the first three. So when you click percentage of grand total, your entire grand total becomes 100%, and then all the others, like the years and then the individual genre, individual gender, is going to be the in percentages. So these percentages are going to give you an understanding of how your data has been segregated or how your revenue is segregated according to the various years. So now if I say this value 8.90, I can clearly see 8.90 is what the males have contributed to the revenue in the year 2013, because this is the bifurcation. And you will see 20.68. So 2016, the total sales was 20.68% of all the years cumulatively. That's what it basically means. The next step is, if I want to see any one of these, either the rows or either the columns. Okay, so what I can do, I can say show values as percentage of column total. What does this mean? Now all the column totals will become 1000, whereas they will be showing how much of these years contributed towards their total sale for the grand total. Whereas if you change this from show values as percentage of column total to row total, what it does exactly the opposite. So now your grand total is 100%, whereas on the other hand, you have got all the years also converted to 100%. Only the in case of what is the total sales coming in from females and males is not aggregated at that level, at that particular column level. It is aggregated at the entire grand total level. You can do is, you can add multiple fields to your rows and columns accordingly. So let us just remove this year from here and remove the gender. Now we have just the revenue, that's 100%. So you can change this back to the value. You can just say show values as no calculation. And you have the 9.5 million. Now what you can do, you can just drag the country. So I'll drag the country into the rows area. It's always good to drag it into the respective area rather than being allowed automatically to be added. So when you just click that tick, it is automatically added. But in some cases, maybe you don't want that particular field in the area that it is being automatically linked to. So now you have the various countries. Now you can drag the product category into the columns area. If I had clicked product category, it would go nested under the country. We don't want that. So the next step now is to use the show values as percentage of grand total and show the entire values that are being contributed for each country. And for each country, you have got three very important categories, and those three categories are contributing towards the entire sale. which now it makes it clearly evident that bikes happens to be the most important factor that is contributing to the revenue. Obviously, bikes are expensive and obviously they are sold in more numbers, or maybe the profit margin or the revenue margin is a lot higher than the other two. So bikes is the main company's work products. On the other hand, you have got clothing and accessories. Now the question is, how do you perform, or how do you create a chart out of this? Very simple. You can click pivot table analyze, and then you can click pivot chart. So once you click pivot chart, you have got the various charts that are available. So you can click a simple column chart, and when you click the column chart, just click OK. So when you click OK, you have a simple column chart that is created. Now whenever any new data is added, okay, for 2017-18, it will automatically filter, it will automatically update your chart as well as data. That's the most important part of the pivot table aspect. Okay, so with respect to the pivot chart, you can create as many pivot charts as you want from this by keeping on updating. So you will notice that in your pivot chart, you have got axis, legends and values. In the axis and legend, you will see that these are two fields that are not, it's not possible to add them or multiply them, etc. On the other hand, you have got sum of revenue that is allowed to be aggregated at any point in time. Okay, now one last thing that I would like to show you with respect to pivot tables, very important and very interesting. If you are performing a year-on-year analysis, in that case it becomes very difficult. So let's say we are performing a year-on-year analysis for each country. So we will remove the product category and we will perform, or we will bring the years into the columns. So let us drag the year into the column area. And here you have the year-on-year analysis. You have the value for each year. So what we will do, we will now just right click on values and say show values as, that is going to be no calculation, that goes back to the original value. And now instead of just sum of revenue, you will drag revenue once again into the values area. So what it does, it's showing you 2 times sum of revenue. But this is very useful because in one of them we will be able to see the value, and the other one we will be able to see the year-on-year growth. So the next step now is very important. You will keep the cell selected for the next sum of revenue, that is the second sum of revenue. And after you have done that, just right click it, any one of these cells, and say show values as, and then you click on percentage difference from. So what we want the percentage difference from? We want the percentage difference from, instead of country, we want the year. So from 2011, what happened in 2012? Was there a growth? No, yes, no, whatever. Okay, and then it will say base item. So instead of selecting previous, select the 2011. Now 2011 will show you the cumulative growth rate, whereas the previous year or the previous value will show you the entire growth rate. So here you will see the first year has no growth rate because it's a starting, obviously. The next one 1.13, then 61.28, then minus 31.81. Because there was a drop in that particular year for the first country. Okay. Now you can see very clearly you have got sum of revenue 2 and sum of revenue. So what you do is you can just rename the sum of revenue to year-on-year growth. So click value field settings, right click and click value field settings, and instead of sum of revenue 2, let's call this as year-on-year growth, YOY growth. And you can click OK. And once you've clicked OK, you will see that here now you have got the name of the field, or that particular field that you are using in set values has been updated. So instead of sum of revenue, it's called year-on-year growth. Okay. So what that does is it gives you the year-on-year growth for all the data that you have in your pivot table. So here it's a very simple one. It was the total sales for all these bike companies, or all the there's one company in all its locations, and they have given us these figures. So accordingly, we have to kind of work with them. Okay. So year-on-year growth becomes a very, very important part of our pivot table analysis tab that you're working with. Okay. So with respect to analysis in pivot tables, you have to be very careful as to how you want to analyze. So not careful as such, it's not difficult, but you should be very, very clear with what intention you have and what you want to actually bring that particular tool for, or how will that tool really help you. That's what is of grave importance. Okay. So that's the end of today's session. Does anybody have any doubts?